Hello, this is Jessi Sletten from Empowering Postpartum, and welcome to the Spanglish World Networks on Zingo TV, channels 250 and 251. Please remember to download both the Zingo TV app on the respective app stores on iOS and Android devices. And while you download, make sure to rate and leave a comment. The app is free. Zingo TV is also available on Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and on all smart TVs 2016 and forward. I am so excited to be back with another great episode of Empowering Postpartum with me, Jessi Sletten, your postpartum empowerment coach, helping you feel calm, confident, and prepared for your postpartum experience before birth so that you can actually have a peaceful fourth trimester that you deserve. And I want to welcome my very special guest today, Kaely Harrod, who is a doula and doula coach. Good morning, Kaely.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm really excited. We were just talking backstage about our topic. It's a really important one, and we're going to be addressing kind of this concept of, postpartum care and how it should be trauma-informed and what that means and why everyone deserves to have trauma-informed care. So we're going to be diving into that. But before we do, I'd love for you to just kind of introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your journey and how you got into the work that you do.
Yeah, of course. My journey started like a lot of doulas where I had kids and then realized people need support during the time of having kids.
Yes.
My oldest was 14. So I have a 14-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And with our oldest, we were the first of many friends to have a baby. And so I kind of naturally started being like, this is everything you need to know. You know, I'm 4 months ahead of you in this life. And so you need this thing, and this is what's going to happen in the hospital. And all of that kind of naturally was just a part of that postpartum time for me, because I was like, I want to tell you the things I wish I knew. Right.
Yes.
And then, fast forward through many years of toddlers. And then we moved to the DC area, and there is a thriving doula community here. And we were previously in New Jersey, and I didn't even really know what a doula was, like hadn't heard that word much, I had heard of one person having them for twins, which made so much sense to me. But I was like, it's a twin thing. Like when people have more than one baby, naturally.
They need more support. Yeah.
And so a friend of mine had me attend her birth here in DC. And that's kind of how I jumped into doing this professionally. And she had the easiest birth known to man, which I did not have the context for at the time.
Yes.
And I was like, I could do this all the time, and then now she jokes with me that I she dove me into the deep end with her super simple birth story. And then I now have a whole team of doulas. I've been doing this for 7 years full time. And I love it. I'm super passionate about people having support in the prenatal, postpartum space, and just the whole journey and transition that is this space of having babies, for that to be supported, right? Because it's not always, and it can mess with us forever. Like the impact of that stays for the parents and the kids in many cases for so long. And so that's something I'm super passionate about. And I love being able to do it both on the family side and supporting doulas to do that well with their own clients, so yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. It really is this, foundational piece of our parenthood is how we, experience pregnancy, and then how we experience those really crucial transition months and days, into being a new parent, and the support that we have and the nourishment and the nurturing that we get as the parent reflects on how we can really care for and show up for our babies, right? And for our family as a whole. And I think that in this culture that we're surrounded in, especially in the United States, that's just not honored. And it's really, really hard when we don't have that societal support around us, or like in your instance, and I had the same experience where I was the first of my friends. I didn't have like anybody around me to really help, like, is this normal? What should I be doing here? Am I messing up this? Could I be doing this better? And, it's really hard when we don't have that village that surrounds us, like other cultures do. And, like we did hundreds of years ago, and so I think that's really where having a doula can provide that support where that huge gap is existing. For sure.
Yeah. Well, and I feel like one piece of it is also normalizing things, because
Yes.
when we think about like, we're experiencing this new thing, then we also have zero context for whether or not this should be how we're treated, or this should be how often we have care, or all of those pieces that are so important in the midst of it. But it's later that oftentimes people are like, oh, wait, I didn't have to do that. Oh, wait, that thing didn't have to happen. Like, I had no idea because I had nobody to be like, hey, should I be feeling this or not? And in the US, like you said, like, we're just like, fend for yourselves, like, good luck. We'll see you in a month and a half. I mean, really, it's just wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
We could get on that
it really
soapbox
is
for the whole
oh,
episode.
I know. That could be the whole episode.
Lack of postpartum support.
Yes. But that does lead us into kind of one of the topics that I know we wanted to talk about. And that was, how do we advocate for the care that we need, right? And because it's not set up just naturally, or something that, is provided within our healthcare system, it's important for us to feel empowered and know how to advocate for the right care. So I'd love to get your perspective and some tips on how to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I think the very first thing, like on a super basic level, is just giving yourself permission to do it. Like, that is one of the most important things, I think, because we do culturally often kind of default to saying like, I'll sort of do what the norm is, or I'll do what's expected of me, right? We want to be a good patient. We want to be good at being a new parent. But the reality is that you can also have norms and opinions and desires. And if those things are not being centered, as long as they're reasonable things, right? Like, don't put yourself in harm's way, but like, we're not talking about wild extremes. Like, you should have a provider that makes you feel better when you leave the appointment than when you got there. And if that's not the case, most of us live places where there's more than one provider to choose from. And your first step of advocacy in that moment is to say to yourself, I think I want to be treated better than this. And it's okay for me to want to be treated better than this, and maybe it's just that, like, clearly something about us does not mesh. Like, maybe my desires and your desires are so different that you think my desires are weird, even if they're both really benign,
Yeah, absolutely. There's this energetic match, that you want to have with your medical provider, with your doula, with anybody who's supporting you during this journey. Because if you don't feel safe and seen and heard and validated, that's when, the door to trauma can kind of open. And a lot of people, there's trauma is a spectrum, and trauma is individualized. And so I feel like some people who go through something and they're like, that can't qualify as trauma because my baby didn't almost pass away, or I didn't hemorrhage during this time, or whatever, but the truth is if it felt traumatic to you, and it was something that just kind of made you feel broken during this process, then that was trauma. And a way to avoid that, and the best way to ensure that we have a safe experience throughout this whole transition, is to have that care that surrounds you, that makes you feel seen and heard and connected to that person and to that support team. So I couldn't agree more. Like, if you are feeling a mismatch in this, relationship, because that's really what it is. It's a relationship where you are partners in this journey. And so if it doesn't feel like that, and you're feeling this power imbalance where you're like, oh, I just have to keep my opinions to myself, and absolutely that's definitely a red flag for sure.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think another big piece of it for me is, as a doula, and even doing like lactation support or anything like that, I should be always working myself out of a job. And what I mean by that is that, like, I come into someone's house 1 week postpartum and everybody is just losing it. Like, that's a very normal. Super rarely do I come in at 1 week postpartum and people are like, things are going amazingly, because it's just a hard first week. That is normal, But then if I'm working with that family for a few weeks, the first thing I say to them is, this time next week, it's going to feel just even marginally easier. And then from there, it will get marginally easier every week. Right. And so then by the end of our time together, you might still adore me enough to want me to be there all the time, but you don't feel like you can't survive if I'm not there. And that is my goal. Like, I want you to like me, of course, because who doesn't want that?
Right.
But I don't want you to feel like you can't be a parent without another person in your space. Right. And so that should be really what you're experiencing in all of those relationships, whether it's your care team, whether it's your baby, your pediatrician, your lactation support, even your support group of friends should not feel like everybody has an opinion for you and you don't know how to do it. And you have to have their directly.
Oh, I couldn't agree more with that. It's about this sense of empowerment. That's why I named what I do, empowering postpartum, because it's this feeling of, okay, I have a guide or I have a mentor who can help me through this, but this is really my journey, right? I'm at the center of my journey, and these people's role is to support me, like you said, but feel like I'm stepping into this role and I can own this role. I know what I'm doing. Even if I don't know everything I'm doing, I feel confident that, every day I am getting stronger. I'm getting, more reliant on my own intuition and listening to my, my gut on things. And I think that's a really beautiful thing to think about, because I do see a lot of times in this field where people are more acting like the sage on the stage, right? And they're just trying to be like, I know what to do. This is what you should do. And we see this in the medical community a lot as well, which, that's a whole nother thing, but it is hard. It's like, you should be feeling like you are at the center of it. And you kind of mentioned that at the beginning, the person-centered care is super important. So I couldn't agree with what you said more. I think that's exactly what you should be looking for, is that team that makes you feel like you've got this, and not, oh, you can't do this without me.
Yeah. Well, and I think the other big piece in my mind is that we sometimes don't have a great connection with our own wisdom about ourselves, right? And I mean, I say this as part of that group, right? I also sometimes don't have that. I was thinking about this the other day when my 10-year-old was bored naturally in the summertime and Googled something like, I'm bored, what should I do? And I was like, so interesting, because there's, of course, thousands of things, but also in this space, if we devalue our own experience to such an extent, we can look outside of us for everything. We're like, what can I do? I have an hour free without the baby. What should I want to do during that time? Nobody else can actually tell you that. And it is different for everyone. So if Jessi comes to me and says okay, you're here for 2 hours with my kid, I just need to go for a walk on my own, right? Where someone else is I just haven't spoken to an adult all day and would like to just talk to you, right? And a third person's dear God, I need a nap, and a fourth person is saying I know this sounds crazy, but I actually want to do a workout. I feel like I don't ever have the space to do that. And so that the piece that is what is the thing that makes you feel more of yourself and more of human in the midst of this space, and what is kind of the missing piece, even day by day. That is work that we have to do in ourselves so that we can support ourselves and we can ask for the needs that we have, rather than someone coming and saying, how can I help you? Which is not my favorite question.
Right.
That along with let me know if you need anything. I'm no, you do. You need things.
Right.
You need
they
so
always
many
do.
things.
Right. Exactly.
Just decide on something that they need and do it.
Yes, exactly.
But being able to even say, what I really need is a few minutes by myself, or I remember for myself, I was I want a solo Target run. That's what I want. I want to go to Target and get a Starbucks drink and pretend I don't have a baby at home crying. And I'll be back in an hour, because I know I need to feed him. But my husband was you should go take a nap. And I'm no. I'm going to drive to Target and drink a coffee and push my cart around and pretend no one knows that I have a kid. And then I'm going to come home. And in the moment, that made no sense to him, but that is what I wanted and needed. And it worked well for me. And sure, I could have used a nap. Everyone can,
Right.
But I think even that allows us to be more wildly selfish about who we are. And I talk about that in labor too, because we need to tap into that for this whole time of life, you know?
Yeah, absolutely.
But the like fundamental undervaluing of our own wisdom about ourselves is such a big piece when we're like, I don't even know what I want and need.
Right.
Then, you know, Jessi can't come to you and be like, you know what you need is. And I mean, sometimes to some extent we can, right? Like sometimes we can
Yeah.
be like, girl, you need a nap, you know?
Right. Or,
Or,
Exactly.
you know, like you go shower, you haven't eaten today.
Yeah.
But I
Right.
think on like a bigger level of like thinking about the entire postpartum time, we have to be able to also sort through like what would actually be helpful. How do people show up for us in a way that feels good and
Yeah.
isn't just about them, you know?
Yes.
Because people give how they
Absolutely.
want to receive. So they naturally are going to give in ways that they prefer. And we
Right.
have to sort of carve out space for ourselves to be like, you know, what would feel best for me is for you to show up like this
Right.
at this time, you know, like, and not any
Right.
other time.
Right, exactly. Oh my gosh, yes, I couldn't agree more. It's one of the things that I kind of talk about with preparing for postpartum, because everybody's like, how can you prepare for postpartum? Like you have no idea what to expect. And to an extent, yes, that's true, right? Like we don't know our baby's temperament. We don't know, how we're going to end up birthing and what birthing wounds we have to heal and all these things, right? But there are some of these fundamental things that we can prepare for. And one of those things, that we talk about is the self-care piece, but it's so much more than just like the, surface level self-care stuff. It's exactly what you're talking about. It's like what nourishes me and like gives me back energy that I can rely back on when I'm feeling, like I need something for myself. And having kind of some time to process that before the baby gets here can be super
Yeah.
important and helpful, because then you have the time to sit back and be like, what makes me feel connected to myself? What makes me feel connected to my friends and my community? And how can I take what I'm doing now and kind of, manipulate that a little bit for when baby's here and still have those connective pieces? Because that's one of the biggest things that I know I experienced in talking to a lot of new moms and moms in general and parents in general is this sense of loss of themselves. And I think that can be one of the biggest contributing factors, is that we're not listening to what we need and what fuels us, that soul care, right? That we really, really need. And it could be that your soul care is going to Target and having a coffee and just walking around, right? And that's okay. Like you don't have to have a certain way that you approach self-care. And I think, like I said, having kind of a list that you can go back on and be like, oh my gosh, yes, I haven't read my book in like 4 months and I would love to just sit and read a chapter or whatever that might look like. I think is a part of that self-care plan that you should definitely be building in for yourself.
Yeah, totally. Well, and I think like some part of me is like, okay, so what does this have to do with trauma-informed care, right?
Yeah.
Because I think when we think about the postpartum time, there are so many layers. And one layer is how other people treat you. Another layer is how you treat yourself, right? How you show up for yourself and advocate for yourself. And a third layer is also like, I mean, there's more than three, but the third for now is thinking through like, what does it look like to be honest about the things that have impacted us previously and to kind of give ourselves space to show up with them. So one way that I do this with clients that I think is kind of a relatable example is I have a lot of clients that are high anxiety or have a past of loss, specifically around pregnancy. And then of course the process of pregnancy and birth can be really triggering for those things. Right. And oftentimes I'll have clients say something to me like, I just really hope I don't have like a panic attack in the process, or I really hope, in the postpartum time, I'm not dealing with whatever. And I'm like, well, let's assume that you will, right? Like you have the history to have some panic attacks in the postpartum time. How do we manage that? Like, what does it look like to have good support around that? And to not be like, I shouldn't have a panic attack, but more to be like, I'm going to give myself some space. If my body freaks out about this a little, that's okay. and it's understandable. And what does it look like to like, I don't know, not honor that, but to not shame it, you know, and to also give myself the resources I need, because it's not the same for each of us. Part of it is also being like, you know, for me, it's this thing. And I know that makes no sense to anyone, you know, but for you, it's a different thing. And as a person, sometimes we know those things, but sometimes we also have to say like, okay, when you did that, that felt not great. And so in the moment, I'm learning that that's actually a bit on the triggering side. Right. And then I'm asking you to not do it that way again, because my trauma in the past is legitimate, and it's okay for me to have some boundaries around that. Even if it's something weird, like I never want someone to touch me on the shoulder. I mean, truly, like there's some kind of like obscure parts of this, right? Because our brain, the way that it categorizes things is sometimes a little bananas. You know?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. But it is like, I mean, we also have to kind of give ourselves permission to be like, I know this might sound weird, but don't touch my elbows, you know?
Right.
And if that is in the moment where you're like, gosh, Jessi, you touched my elbows, and now I'm realizing I don't like that. That is part of also protecting that, like that space in your brain, so that you're not adding to the trauma that's already there. And part of it is, of course, keeping trauma from happening. I mean, that's what we want as well. But also acknowledging, like, I have this trauma. I've already known it's there, you know, I already know certain things trigger it. And so let's have a game plan around that, so that we are setting it up for you as an individual, rather than being like, gosh, I hope that trauma doesn't come out in the midst of this, you know?
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's such a great point, because I feel, you know, that is something that I had to learn the hard way. Like, okay, I have some trauma stories that I walk with already, coming into an extremely vulnerable time, right? Like pregnancy, birth, postpartum. Oh my goodness, some of the most vulnerable times we will ever be, right? And that can be physically, mentally, emotionally. And so it's okay to understand that, okay, there will be some of these triggers that happen. And I love your point of, let's create a plan around it, instead of just shoving it down and being like, well, I'm just going to assume everything's going to be fine. I'm not going to worry about it, and it's not going to happen. Instead, going where it's hard and sitting there for a minute and being like, okay, this is not my ideal birth. This is not my ideal postpartum, but how can I still move through it and have the resources and support, like you said, surrounding me, to make this as good as it can be, even when it's not great, even when it's not the perfect scenario. So I really loved that insight. And I don't know if you have any thoughts on like how people can kind of go there with themselves, what they could think about, what kind of plan they could put into place. Because everybody's trauma is different, everybody's trigger is different, like you were saying, but you know, maybe there's just some tips you have on how they can go there without causing another trigger, or like, you know, being more fearful to go there in order to be prepared, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it does depend so much on what it is and all of that. I think the biggest thing is to have support from people that actually feel incredibly safe, you know? And one thing I talk about for birth is the oxytocin factor of people, because, you know, oxytocin is what's giving contractions. And if people are stressful or scary, or, you know, bring on some kind of fear for you, even if you're just embarrassed in front of them, like if it's your sister and you're like, I'm not sure I want her to see me naked, you know, like then that is all the wrong hormones. The same is true for postpartum. And I think what we sometimes do is say yes to people that we shouldn't say yes to as part of our support team, because they have a relationship with us that should be supportive. But if it's not, you have to be brutally honest with yourself about that. And whether that's like, you know, the level of exposure, like if you're planning to feed your baby with your body's going to be showing, you know, like that piece of it. That's like, can this person see you shirtless? Because you don't want to be stuck in your room all day, if that's what that's going to equal, you know?
Exactly.
But also thinking through like, what does it look like to be supported by this person in an unexpected scenario? And so part of what I think about with trauma preparation is thinking about like, okay, if Jessi's going to be there with me, right? Then what if something comes up that I didn't expect? Do I trust that we can manage that together? And I feel confident that her love and care for me and support of me and all of that is going to create a safe environment for that. Right.
Yes.
So that's, I think, number one, because there's going to be things you don't anticipate. Right.
Right.
The second
always.
thing, always, every single time. There's one thing that's constant. It's the unknown.
Yeah, exactly.
The second thing is, I think, talking through things with those support people that you already know are there, and if it is like, if there's sexual trauma, that is a very big trigger in this time, because there's lots to do with those reproductive organs. If it's trauma of like, being in pain, and there's that kind of, there's chronic pain that's there, or medical trauma, otherwise, those things might be triggered. And thinking through like, what are my triggers, and also what are my coping strategies, and how are we going to bring those in, and who's going to help remind me of those? Because this is the time when we forget everything. Our brains turn to mush.
Yes.
And this is where, like, I'm sure you harp on this as well, but like the prenatal planning is so vital, because your hormones have not yet completely lost their minds.
Right. Exactly. And so, and you're not sleep deprived, and you're not like in pain and all these things. Right.
You don't have a baby crying all the time.
Yes.
We're making postpartum sound so amazing.
I know.
It's awesome. You should go have children.
Right. I know. But you know what? I wish somebody would have these conversations with me, because I think it's like painted, and we're doing better at this. I feel like with social media kind of taking a turn to being more raw and vulnerable and real. And I think that is important, because we're shining both sides, right? It's not this like rainbows and sunshine where it's all bad and a dumpster fire, right? Like we have these moments where it's going to be beautiful, and it's going to be everything we imagined. And then there's going to be the really hard stuff. So having a plan in place and talking about this, so that we can move through all of those different roller coasters as smoothly as possible, is where we're going to have an overall good experience in postpartum. For sure.
Well, and as silly as it sounds, like making a list of people that you would call about things, I think that is huge. And I'm sure that I'm not alone in the experience of like making the mistake of calling the wrong person, being like, oh, I'm dealing with this. And they're just like, get yourself together. And you're like, thanks.
Right. That was so helpful. Thank you.
I forgot you're not the person to talk to about this,
Right. Exactly.
But I think because in the postpartum time, you're constantly making micro decisions. The decision fatigue is so strong. And so even just sitting and being like, I am feeling so overwhelmed. Who do I talk to about that? Like, if you just have a list of like, you are having the worst day ever, call this person. Like they always make you feel amazing about yourself. They're not going to make you feel terrible about having a terrible day. You're going to get off the phone with them feeling better. And bonus, if they've been through this crazy newborn time, and they can be like, you're going to survive, But do not call your family member who's never had a baby, who thinks their dog is the same as having a newborn. That's not the person, because they're going to be like, it's easy. What's wrong with you?
Right. Exactly.
Even just that work ahead of time is setting yourself up for success. Because then you have a tangible resource when you're like, I am having a terrible day. Your brain doesn't have to try to go back and be like, who should we even try to touch base with? You can be like, I already know these two people are my safe, like, it's a terrible day people. And this other person is my, like, I need a meal really last minute. And this other person is like, damn, I forgot groceries. Sorry if I'm not a curse.
No, you're fine. You're fine.
But people like, I know for me, I have some friends that I'd be like, shoot, I need this thing from the store. Are you anywhere near a store? Right. And I know it's a slight inconvenience. I know, but I also know they're willing, to do that. And they'll be like, I dropped the toilet paper outside your door, get it whenever you can,
Right.
That's some people, not everyone. And there's other people who might even not be close logistically to be able to do something like that, who I can call, and they make me feel amazing about who I am. And, remind me of all the great things that are coming, and can tell me like crazy stories about their teenagers or whatever,
Right.
things are just as important because it normalizes the experience so that you're not stuck in a space of like, I'm pretty sure I can't survive this on the really hard days, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because those days are there. Like that's a newborn is hard. You're learning this baby for the first time. They're also outside for the first time. It's also hard for them, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So anyway,
No,
I
I
could
love
keep
that.
going and going on that, but
I know. No, I completely agree. That is one of the things that, you know, I talk a lot about as well, is just this curation of your village, right? And it's so important to figure out who those people are, what role they can play, and where their skills are, right? Like maybe they're just not that type of person who can sit and just listen to really, really hard things, but they're the get shit done people. And they will be like,
yeah,
yes, I will clean your
yeah,
bathroom and I will go grocery
totally.
shopping for you because that's where I shine, right? And like
Yeah.
knowing that and having
Mhm.
them kind of set up in your mind that way,
Yeah.
exactly like you said, it reduces that decision fatigue because you're like, oh yes, this is
Yes.
my cheerleader group without the toxic positivity, but they're the
Yeah.
ones who's going to tell me I'm a great mom and I'm doing all this stuff right, right?
Yeah.
And then I have the ride or die people who are like,
Mhm.
give me it all. Like I
Yeah.
can sit here when you are just like having a total mental breakdown and I will
Yep.
hold that for you. You know, they're the people
Mhm.
who really just are your soulmates, right? They're the ones who can
Yeah.
really be there for you. And then you have your, you know, your other people who can get the other task oriented stuff done that you've
Yeah.
already thought about.
Yeah.
Is just a really great use of your time in pregnancy
Yeah.
is
Oh,
creating that
100%.
village.
It also helps so much when someone says something like, let me know if you need anything. I'm like, if that's a
Yes.
neighbor saying that to you, you know what you need from
Mhm.
them is every single Thursday, they need to take your trash can to the curb, you know?
Yes.
I mean, if
Oh,
you live in a
yes.
city,
Hmm.
move your trash cans every single week. They also move their trash can every single
Yep.
week. Take that off your
Hmm.
plate, you know,
Yes.
for the foreseeable future. Like you're about to have a
Right.
baby. And so that
Hmm.
also helps you kind of break down those things where you're not like, I don't even know what I need. I mean, you still
Right.
might feel that a bit, but
Yeah.
I can't
Hmm.
promise it'll be entirely gone.
Right.
But it does help you kind of preemptively think through how you do curate this support that is the most
Yes.
supportive to you, you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and thinking outside of like just family members, like you said, like knowing who's
Yeah.
safe, knowing who can help meet certain needs that you need,
Yeah.
and really establishing those boundaries. And I think boundaries is a really
Mhm.
important conversation
Yeah.
where we could go a lot of different ways with this trauma informed care topic.
Mhm.
But I think that that's one of the things that I really struggled with as a new parent was boundary
Mhm.
setting because it was just a skill I was not good at the beginning. I
Mhm.
was a people pleaser through and through. And that's not what you need to be in the postpartum
No.
time frame. Like you need to be able to accept and receive instead of always
Mhm.
be giving, giving, giving.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know, it might not be exactly what we had on our docket to talk
No,
about, but I
that's
would love
fine.
to get your thoughts on boundary setting and like maybe some
Yeah.
really good tips that people could
Yeah.
use for setting boundaries.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like a little bit of a broken record and being like, it depends on you,
Yep,
right?
totally. Yeah.
But I think part of having a supported postpartum time, and this is true for pregnancy, it's true for birth, right? Is and parenting in
Hmm.
general is also letting yourself kind of settle into what decisions feel good for you and what
Yes.
decisions don't. And in and I know like boundaries we could talk about like, you know, don't let your mother-in-law come over if she is mean to you. You know, like
Right.
that's
Right.
that's one level of boundaries. But I think on the other
Yes.
side like thinking through like like what things actually work for you as a family. And in
Yeah.
parenting, I mean, I'm 14 years into this at this point. People have real strong opinions about stuff that are
Yeah.
not right or wrong. You know, like
Right.
there's like
Hmm.
camps in all these different
Yes.
topics, and they're
Hmm.
so convinced that they're doing it correctly.
Right.
What you're almost always getting with that message is a parent that is either doing one of two things. One, saying they did it correctly, their kid loved this thing, it was the best thing ever, they're amazing
Right.
parents. They probably have one child in that case, right? Because they have a
Right.
very small sample size. They've
Yep.
succeeded at their one time. And I don't mean to
Hmm.
say that they're not doing amazing, right? But each kid is
Right.
so different. The
Right.
other camp is someone who feels like they did something specifically wrong and they don't want you
Mm.
to replicate that mistake. And
Yeah.
they are attributing that to one very particular thing. So this is like people who say,
Hmm.
kid refused bottles because I didn't introduce them earlier. So you need to introduce them right away. Folks that say I gave a pacifier way too early, that's why my kid didn't latch. You need to avoid pacifiers at all costs forever, no matter what, right? Like that's, and I know I'm sounding ridiculous, but I'm doing that on purpose because there are not those truths in this time. Like there, if it was that kind of formula, we would all know it. Like we could teach that to people. You know, we could say at 4.5 days postpartum, introduce a pacifier for 20 minutes a day and you won't have any issues.
Like a manual. It doesn't exist.
It doesn't exist. And how boring would our world be if that's how we functioned as people, right? If we were like, we all eat at 12:37 p.m. We eat this amount of food. We all like the same things. So part of this space is you saying, okay, this is how our family functions. And also, as we get to know our kid, this is what works for them. And honoring both of those things in those boundaries. And it can be some like very obscure things. It can be things like, you know, we all start winding down at this time of day, or like we're all off for a short time. Like if you have the privilege of being off work in the postpartum time for an extended amount of time, maybe your day doesn't really start until noon. So a boundary is you're not setting any appointments and you're not letting anybody come over before noon, because you try to have one of my clients calls it a family nap. She was like, we really try to have a family nap at 11 a.m. Can you please not come during that time? And I was like, I will not mess up nap time ever. You know,
exactly.
She was like, somehow she had a toddler and a newborn. So she was like, somehow we all get to sleep almost every day at this time. And we guard it with our lives. And I was like,
exactly. As you should.
You do. Yeah. She was like, it's the most magical thing ever. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, never give that up. Like until that stops working, do not let anyone come at 11 ever. You know?
Yes, absolutely.
But part of it is that like where, you know, you're saying, I mean, as a postpartum doula, the reason we had that conversation, as I said, can I come to your house from 10 to 2? And she was like, well, you could, but we do this family nap time. And I was like, oh, then the answer is no. I can't come to your house from 10 to 2. I can come to your house anytime after noon and then never before that, because this family nap time is absolutely sacred.
Yes, like absolutely.
Has to be guarded with your life. And so part of that is something that you kind of establish as you go, which is hard. Because you can't then say, I mean, you can say like, okay, Jessi is mean to me, so I'm not going to ever let her come over while I'm postpartum.
Right.
I shouldn't use you as both the good and the bad example.
It's fine. That's what I'm here for.
Right. But part of it is also saying like, okay, now that we're a week into this, we know that this thing does not work well for us, right? Or now that we're a month into it, like this doesn't work for our family. And so we don't do it. And even just giving your space to be like, we don't tell everyone about it because people have opinions, you know? I mean, I have clients that exclusively pump because they love it so much more than the unpredictability of the baby at the breast. And oftentimes it's because there was a tricky start or whatever. And I had a client that legitimately just needed someone to be like, it's okay if you prefer pumping and bottle feeding. That's okay. You're not hurting anybody. You're not doing any damage. It is perfectly fine. There's nothing wrong with you if it feels easier to continue down this path, because she was like, everyone I talk to assumes that I want to get back to a good latch with the baby. And I'm kind of like, do I want that? She was like, then I feel like maybe I should want that. Like maybe that is where this should go. Maybe that's what everyone should want, you know? And in that moment, I'm like, absolutely not. Like, I mean, and we could have all sorts of discussions about feeding and whatever like that. Every family has got to establish what actually works for them. And part of that is giving yourself space to be open to what's working as you get to know this kid who's literally never been here before, you know?
Yes, absolutely. So, oh my gosh. Yeah. I couldn't agree with that more. And I think, you know, you can do some of that like boundary establishment ahead of time with things that are very clear, right? Like that aren't going to change once baby's here. And I think having those discussions, if you are partnered, is super important too, because being on the same page with your partner is so key. And so many of us, I know I'm speaking from my own personal experience here, but we just assume we're on the
Yeah.
same page and we all know the same thing and we all agree
Turns
on
out
what
we're
we're going
not.
to be doing. No, we're really not. We're not. And so it's so important to have those conversations and being like, well, what
Yeah.
do you think about this? You know, what boundaries do you want to set and where do you feel like our parenting philosophies mesh and what are our parenting philosophies and what do we want to do with
Yeah.
XYZ? You know, there's a lot of things you can talk about ahead of time.
So many things. Yes.
Yes. And establishing that communication
Yeah.
is where the power is, because even if things do change, you have that open communication already established and you can approach it together as a team instead of, you know, it's very, very common in, you know, those first few months to have a lot of, you know, relationship breakdown and miscommunication and resentment. You know, there's a lot of research out there about it. And so if you can try to learn how to turn toward one another and have these discussions before baby is here, like any work on your relationship and your communication is going to pay you tenfold in the postpartum time.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and all of the stuff that we are talking about around, like, you know, establishing what things are like actually life-giving to you, you know, like that stuff. If you're partnered with someone, they also need to be doing that work.
Yes.
Because it's once the baby is on the outside, if you're both working at this, it's exhausting all around. Like there's a physical aspect that is not there for the partner that didn't deliver the baby, right? But there's an emotional aspect that they also went through in that process of supporting the person they love through that. And this transition into this new identity is also there for them. And so that like communication of needs goes both ways, you know, and it shouldn't be like, okay, well, my partner's needs are all being met and I have like one or two, you know, I mean, there's all sorts of imbalance that can happen there. But I think just as much as like I needed, you know, a Target run and a coffee, my husband's thing was like for sure a nap, you know, and he would be like, I feel like if I don't sleep for an hour, I might die. You know? And I'm like, okay, go sleep for an hour. Like we, whatever happens out here, we will be fine.
Yes.
You know, like
Exactly.
you can have an hour of sleep and you're completely off. Your brain can shut down. You know, you don't have to monitor anybody. And that communication is such a big piece of that, like setting yourself up as well, because partners take on the support that we don't have, right? So if you don't have someone taking the trash can out, you don't have someone getting groceries, it is often the partner that didn't give birth. And then they're also overwhelmed, you know, and then we're not even diving into the trauma of the partner, you know.
I know.
But that's a real thing as well, you know. So on both sides, I think being super intentional about it as much as you can be sets you up to have the least amount of surprises in the postpartum time, you know, knowing that there's unpredictable bits that are going to be added in there, you know.
Right. But the communication, if it's there, then you can handle that together, right? It's not as much as I have to take all of this on myself and heal from birth and do all this, or from a partner's perspective. Oh my gosh, they have so much going on. They delivered the baby. They're trying to figure out the feeding stuff. Like I can't burden them with any of these other things, right? And so making sure that you're just really clear with one another and then having that outside support, because not one person can do it all. And that includes your partner and that includes you. So not even two people can do it all, right? Like you need that support outside of the two of you. You know, 100%. You really do.
No, you definitely do. And even just expecting that there are going to be things that come up that you didn't anticipate. That's huge. Like one of the things that I really harp on is normalizing that this journey is not something that we get to dictate how it goes. And so there are going to be good and bad surprises along the way. And whether those are things that you're like, how did I not know this was a thing? Or things that are like super rare and you're like, dang, we got the wild card in this one, you know? Those things are there for everybody. Going in, assuming you're the exception to that, is going to set you up for some significant trauma. If you're like, well, I'm sure we won't have whatever thing it is. Because then if that thing is playing out for you, instead of normalizing the fact that we don't control this, you're thinking you've done something wrong to be in that scenario, you know?
Exactly.
So in my mind, I'm like, part of it is like, come with some curiosity and some like tools, right? So it's like, this thing might need some fixing. So I brought my tools just in case, but let's see what kind of fixing it needs, so that you're not setting yourself up to be super anxious and overwhelmed about it. But you're also not like, I'm sure it will all be wonderful, you know? And then when you have crappy days, you're not like, what's wrong with me? Why do I not like this? You know, am I mad at my 1-year-old right now? You know what I mean? Like those moments where you're just like, how can you make me so angry? You know, like just by throwing food across the room, you know?
Exactly.
And part of it is that like normalizing that in ourselves too, so that we have, we're giving ourselves the patience and the bandwidth to be able to be like, yeah, I'm losing my mind today, but that's okay. Like that's normal, you know, tomorrow I can gather it back.
Exactly. Yeah. Not having such high expectations that are just not realistic for yourself, you know, and because that you're opening it up for that shame and that, you know, just feeling like, oh my gosh, I am messing this up so bad, or something's wrong with me because I can't do it all. And the reality is no one can. So give yourself some grace and know that you're going to have bad days and have good days. And having the tools on the bad days is what's going to make the difference for you to be able to get through them easier. And, you know, and you're learning along the way. I always tell any new parent that like, this is a learning journey, like every bit of it for you and for your baby. Like you're not
literally for the rest of your life.
Yeah, exactly. They're not coming out knowing like, oh, I need to say this or do this cry so mom knows exactly what no, like you wouldn't expect that for your baby. So try not to put that expectation on yourself as well. Like it's all a learning process. Even if some of the things are natural or, you know, everybody, you know, his body is meant to do this or that, like throw all that out the window and just know that like, it's a process, it's a journey. And, you know, every step of the way you're learning something new and you'll get through this. For sure.
Totally. And one of the phrases I often say to folks is like, unless it's a safety concern, anytime someone says all babies should X or all postpartum people should, I'm like, that phrase makes me right away be like, I have questions.
Yes, exactly.
Because is there something that we can apply to every single person who's delivered, you know?
Right.
And yes, like, I mean, your team after delivery is going to send you home with a list of things that are concerning signs, right? Like pay attention to your own health. You're going to have things for the baby. Like, are they pooping and peeing enough, right? Like this is why we have the prenatal or the postpartum visits with the pediatrician. So they're seeing what they weigh and all of that. You're putting them in their car seat safely. Like those things, yes, there is a right and wrong way to do it, right?
Right. Yeah.
But otherwise, like how the baby burps, how they soothe, when they eat, how often they wake up, like all of that, you are literally learning alongside them. And so when someone else comes to you and says like, oh, Jessi, your baby doesn't do this thing at 7 a.m. every day, you can be like, yeah, no, because 7 a.m. Like why, what is magical? I mean, you can kind of already see the ridiculousness in that because you're like, oh no, but you don't have my kid and you didn't have my birth and you didn't have my pregnancy and you don't have my body anyway. Right. So there's so many layers there that you're like, oh yeah, well then of course your like bedtime setup doesn't work for me because I am not you. And I am happy for you that it works for you. Like I can be thrilled that it works for you and also be like, I would never do that. That sounds crazy, you know? And that I think gives you so much ownership over this experience too, where you can be like, this is how we do it. And we actually like it like that, even though it doesn't make sense to other people. That's okay. You know, and that also in parenting helps you settle so much because your kid is going to keep being a new version of themselves over and over and over and over. And again, we're not trying to scare you away from ever being a parent. You know? Right. But like as a mom of teenagers, it doesn't stop, right? We're learning this new phase of life all the time. And the more you give yourself space to learn this with your kid and not just assume every other parent of 14-year-olds knows what they're doing except me, then you're also giving yourself the space to learn what works well for your kid, to learn what works well for you, and to kind of create that rather than having a strict idea of like, it should look like XYZ for all families. And if that's not how it looks for me, I'm doing it wrong, or my partner's doing it wrong, or we're somehow messing this up, which of course then just undermines everything you're doing every day and makes it so hard to have any confidence in your parenting.
Right, exactly. All of that, always looking externally for the right way to
Yeah.
do something. It'll burn you out so quickly. And then there's no faster way
No.
for you to start mistrusting what you can
Yeah.
see and feel, with your own body or your own
Yeah.
child. Or so it is hard because you want to tap into that internal guide and
Yeah.
also know that there is support. Like if things aren't going the way that
Yeah.
you really need them to, or something doesn't feel right, then there is
Yeah.
that outside support, but it's fitted in a way that is supporting you as an individual and not just being
Yeah.
like, you got to do it this way and it's the only way to do it. And
Yeah.
if it doesn't work, then something's wrong with you or your baby,
Right.
and it's like,
Yeah.
no, that's not what we're doing here.
Yeah.
We're not doing
No,
that.
no. Also, for the record,
Exactly.
that's just not true.
Yeah, exactly. Like
Yeah.
there's a lot of things in this parenting
Yeah.
journey where people will try to convince you like this is the only way to get your
Yeah.
baby to sleep through the night, or this is the only way to get your baby to
Yeah.
eat solids or whatever, and it's
Yeah.
just like blah. Any
No.
of those like,
Mm-mm.
polarized statements you can just throw out the
Yeah.
window and just disregard.
Yeah. Or you can
Mhm.
just have a second kid and they'll throw them out the window for you.
Exactly. Exactly.
They'll be like, "Oh,
Oh
you
my
thought you
God.
knew what you were doing. Just kidding."
Right. Just kidding. Here's this other thing you never even thought you'd
Right.
have to deal with. Oh
Yes.
man, that's so funny.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to get any like last minute thoughts from you just around, like trauma informed care, maybe what to look
Mhm.
for or just anything that
Yeah.
you feel like we didn't touch on to kind of share with everybody watching today.
Um, I think my biggest takeaway for you all would be trust yourself. Like
Yeah.
really trust what you're feeling around scenarios, around people, and honor that. Like if this person wants to be helpful, but it feels crappy to have their help, that's
Yeah.
okay. And you should
Mhm.
honor the fact that it feels crappy over letting them be helpful.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so taking that time to really like listen to yourself and set that space up for you is so
Mhm.
important for the rest of your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And I loved your saying, being wildly selfish in a way that
Totally. Yeah.
that is a good thing, like
Yeah.
advocating for your needs is actually not
Yeah.
selfish. It's just
No.
like it's the way we need to approach things to be healthy and happy,
Yeah.
and to be
Yeah.
present with our kids and
100%.
to get what we need. So go
Yeah.
ahead and be
Yeah.
that advocate for yourself.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, how can people get in touch with you? Where can they find you
Mm.
in the big world of the internet and just kind of stay connected with you?
Yeah. So, pregnant folks, I have some resources online. My biggest Instagram at the moment is at Harrod Doula. And then if you're a perinatal professional or a doula watching this, I have a podcast called Doula Tips and Tits.
I love that.
And that has some stuff for pregnant folks too, but it's
Yeah.
mostly about doulas and service-based businesses like doing their work sustainably so they can show up for folks. So those are my two favorite places to hang out. So
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Well, this has been
yeah.
such a great conversation, Kaely. I really appreciate your thoughts and knowledge and expertise. And it's just been a fun conversation too. So I really appreciate you coming on to the show. It's been really fun.
Thank
And
you
then
so
I
much for
remember,
having me.
yeah, of course, of course. And then before we go, I always like to remind everybody watching, I have a postpartum prep course available called Beyond Birth, which covers all this stuff that we've been talking about. It's the things that you can try to prepare for ahead of time in birth to set you up for these tools and resources and support to make this time something that you can enjoy and feel supported through instead of barely surviving and just
Yeah.
having a really, really difficult time. So if that's something that you're interested in, you can find the link in my bio here on Instagram, which my handle's up here, but it's at empowering_postpartum on Instagram. And it's a great course. And also, just as a special gift for my friends watching right now, you can get that for 50% off with the coupon code EPTV, so Empowering Postpartum TV, and that will get you the course for just $47. So that's something you're interested in, check that out. You can always DM me questions. I'm on Instagram a lot as well. So anytime you just want to connect, please feel free to do so there. And also, I want to remind everyone watching that this show can also be heard on the Spanglish Radio Network. Please check out spanglishworld.ca for all the news and programming. Spanglish World, watch it, hear it, read it, download it, and live it. And this has been a great episode, and we'll be back next week, Thursday, 12 p.m. Eastern, for another great episode of Empowering Postpartum. So thank you so much again, Kaely. We'll stay connected for sure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, of course. All right. Thanks, everybody.